Welcome to Pleasurology Island. I'm Freethought Steve, the lone pleasurologist. Welcome to the Freethought Pleasurology Project, also known as the Pioneers of Pleasurology, the Pleasurology Overachievers Club, and the League of Extraordinary Pleasurologists. So I've been describing to you my own personal psychosexual development in an attempt to give you a feeling for how each of us has a unique sexual history of particular experiences that happen to us and nobody else. You know, we all have a totally unique set of sexual experiences as we grew up, and how that affects our adult sex drive, because what's happening with our sexual history is an interaction between the experiences we have and our emotional brain. Okay, our emotional brain there has sexiness recognition circuits, and it will recognize automatically certain situations as being sexy, as being situations that deserve a sexual arousal response. And so when the emotional brain recognizes a situation as a sexy situation, it activates the sexual arousal circuits of the emotional brain, and we get not only a feeling of being sexually turned on, that special fun feeling. It's a special kind of euphoria, erotic euphoria, that has a flavor all of its own in consciousness. There's no other kind of euphoria that's exactly like the euphoria of becoming sexually aroused. And so the experience of becoming sexually aroused is rewarding in itself, because the pleasure that we feel in consciousness when we become sexually aroused is a pleasure that we would like to experience again. And afterwards we remember that, and we remember what it was that evoked from our emotional brain that response of sexual arousal. We remember what that situation was, and we'll seek out that situation again because we enjoy the feeling of being sexually aroused. And ultimately, when our sex drive is fully mature, we will not only become sexually aroused, but we will experience orgasm, which is the satisfaction of the sex drive. It's the experience that satisfies the sex drive in the same way that food satisfies the hunger drive, or oxygen satisfies the breathing drive, or water satisfies the thirst drive. Speaking of which, so once we experience orgasm, that is an even more pleasurable experience than sexual arousal is. Sexual arousal is blissful in and of itself, but orgasm is the culminating pleasure of sexual experience. And once we have orgasms, we want to have them again and again, because they're one of the best pleasures that it's possible for us to create in our consciousness in life. You know, right up there with eating the most delicious food that you can imagine, or with the other part, the romantic part of love, you know, the first kiss with someone that you have been wanting to come close to and make your partner. First kiss is a blissful experience too. But anyway, each of us has a unique psychosexual development, psychological sexual development, that we go through a phase where a whole process in our life where our sex drive becomes more and more developed, and that continues on into our young adult years. And the particularly important periods of sexual learning are in childhood from about the ages of 3 to 7, and then around puberty, as soon as when we are approaching puberty, and then after puberty, particularly because we start having orgasms, and then the sexual experiences that we have had the orgasms in connection with. We remember those kind of sexual experiences as especially sexually arousing. So then when we become adults, we can identify those kinds of things that are most arousing to us, and we can connect them back with the memories we had from our earlier sexual development and say, okay, that's where I learned to become really turned on by this particular kind of a situation, and this particular kind of partner, and this particular kind of sexual stimulation, sexual fantasy, sexual interaction, sexual activity. All of the things that we find especially exciting tend to be the ones that we experienced during those critical periods of learning back in childhood and then around puberty and our teenage years and into adulthood. And we can always learn new sexual arousal stimuli. We're not limited or confined to the things that turned us on as youngsters. However, it's good to build upon those turn-ons and add additional turn-ons, associate them with the turn-ons we already have, and gradually learn to elaborate a larger number of sexual turn-ons than we had before, elaborate a larger web of sexual turn-ons, so that we can become turned on by as wide a variety of things as possible. And we should identify the turn-ons that are most natural for us. And that doesn't mean most natural in terms of society's definitions of what is natural or not natural in sexual behavior. Sexual behavior is polymorphous, it takes many, many shapes, and it is very diverse. It is not limited to one type of sexual activity, but almost any kind of sexual activity can become a sexually arousing activity if we do it with the right person under the right circumstances in the right emotional mood. Because the right emotional mood is critical for the quality of our sexual experience. So I am describing to you my own personal sexual development, and I'm going to be analyzing how it developed and how it led to my adult sexual turn-ons. And then you can do the same thing for your own personal sexual history and personal psychosexual development. So where was I? Who remembers what we were talking about last time? Anybody? Just kidding. Right, my mom had pulled my pants down and my penis popped out. I forgot to mention that in order to get a proper view, she had sort of crouched down in front of me. She'd sort of squatted down in front of me so that she'd be at the right eye level, to see what she expected to see, which was patches of dry red skin in my crotch, which I used to get as a child. And she was expecting to have to put some ointment on them in order to clear those little dry red patches up. But she pulls down my pants, and instead of that, my erect penis pops out. It was being held down by the leg of my pants, but then she pulled everything down and it pops out, and basically it's right at eye level for her. So she's face to face with her older son's first erection that she knows of. And it was not what she was expecting, but she handled it pretty well. She was speechless until I asked her, "Mommy, what is it?" Because I'd been wondering that. I'd been having erections for a week or so maybe. And I was wondering, what's this about? I wasn't real worried, but still, I didn't know. And so I thought I'd ask her. And she told me the truth. She didn't tell me the entire truth. She told me just that this was something that happens to a boy as he starts to turn into a man. Okay? Now, if you notice that statement, there's nothing about sex in there. It's just something that happens to a boy as he grows older. Okay? So, at least, she didn't say, oh, it's a terrible thing, you should never let that happen again, and take my penis and smack it with a ruler, to make it stop behaving like that and go back to being a good penis, didn't get erect. That would have been punishing my sex drive. And something like that happened to my stepmother, my father's second wife, she told me, after he died. And we were having some fun conversations on the phone together. And she told me that her mother caught her masturbating as a child. And her mother rubbed cayenne pepper into her genitals, all over her clitoris and her labia and the entrance to her vagina, in order to get her to stop masturbating. So in learning theory, that's what we would call punishment, okay, as opposed to reinforcement. Reinforcement is when you encourage a behavior. You do something that will encourage the behavior. The penis pops out, and you say, oh boy, that's a beautiful penis, and you give it a little bit of massage, and it feels even better, and that would be encouragement to a young man for his erections, and that he should be proud of his erections and be happy every time he has an erection, because that's his body's way of saying, I'm ready to enjoy sexual pleasure, let's do this. And then it would also be good to reward masturbation, show the boy how to masturbate, that he can give himself an orgasm, and say, this is the way to satisfy your sex drive until you are mature enough to be able to make an intelligent decision about having partner sex with somebody, and making sure that you've selected a good partner to have partner sex with. But in the meantime, you've got a sex drive, but you're not in a social position yet to start having sex with anybody else. So just satisfy your sex drive by yourself. Give yourself an orgasm. Make sure to use lubrication so that it feels as good as possible. And notice who it is you fantasize about as you have your orgasm. As you become aroused and have your orgasm, notice who it is you fantasize about, because that's the kind of person that your emotional brain naturally finds sexy. Your emotional brain will generate fantasies about the kind of person that your emotional brain finds truly sexy and gets turned on by. And that will usually have come from some previous experience with someone that your emotional brain finds sexy, whether it's a real life experience like me and my mommy in the bathtub, or a virtual experience like me seeing Gina Lollobrigida in Life magazine. All right, somewhere there's either a real or a simulated, the home movie of my mom swimming in the pool with the gardenia flowers floating on it, and where it looked like she was completely naked because no part of her swimsuit broke the surface of the water. She was probably actually standing in the pool so that she could stand at just the right height, so that the water would be as low as possible without actually exposing the top of her strapless swimsuit that she just bought in the hotel boutique down in Cuernavaca, Mexico. So that would be another, but see, to my emotional brain, I didn't see the bathing suit beneath the water. I saw my mother standing with no clothing on in this water, surrounded by flowers there. I didn't know she was standing. I thought she was treading water, whatever. But anyway, because I was only 6 years old. So that was a stimulus that my emotional brain spontaneously found sexually arousing and gave me a feeling of sexual arousal at the time. Although I don't recall getting an actual erection until I started looking at the pictures of Gina Lollobrigida as the Queen of Sheba in Life magazine in 1959, when I was about 10 years old. So that was 4 years later. And then I started getting full-on erections, which is what my mother uncovered at lunch that day. Now, the other thing that she could have done, besides, there's not just 2 options or 3 options. Okay, her response was kind of neutral. It didn't actually reward me for having the erection, but it didn't punish me either, okay? She didn't rub lotion on my penis, but on the other hand, she didn't rub cayenne pepper on it either. But the most important thing was her emotional attitude, that what could have happened with many parents would be a negative emotional reaction, shaming me for having had that erection. Oh, that's bad, Stevie. You should not have that kind of an erection. That's lust. That means you're thinking dirty thoughts that God doesn't like. See, this is the typical Christian purity movement attitude. If you are becoming sexually aroused, then you are automatically thinking something sinful. Okay? Anyone who looks at a woman with lust in his mind, with desire in his consciousness, is already committing adultery with her. And adultery is one of the 10 commandments, one of the 10 sins that you're listed that you're not allowed to do. And obviously, therefore, if you're sinful, you're going to go to hell. So having an erection is going to make you go to hell. Because having an erection is a sign that you're thinking thoughts that are so bad that you deserve to burn in hell in fire for eternity. Because anything else would be crazy. Okay? That's the only possible response to a young man having an erection as a result of his own natural sex drive that's genetically built into his brain. And the sex drive is coming online. It's genetically wired. It's connected by nerves to the penis. When the emotional brain sees something that matches the emotional brain's sexiness recognition template, then, okay, it turns on the sexual arousal circuits in the emotional brain, and those send nerve impulses down to the blood vessels in the penis. They open the blood vessels up, blood flows into the penis, and all the tissues in the penis swell up. The penis is made up of like billions of water balloons, tiny, tiny water balloons. And you know how if you put a hose to a balloon and turn on the faucet, the balloon swells up until it can't swell up anymore, and eventually it would break. But you take it off before that and you tie it up, right? And then you've got a balloon, water balloon. Well, if you take another one, put it next to it, and another one like that, and you tie off all these water balloons, and then you build a whole bunch of them, all of a sudden you've started with a packet full of flat balloons that are not at all filled with anything. But then you fill them up one by one, and that packet of balloons has expanded out enormously. And fortunately, there's in the penis, there is a sheath of tough connective tissue, kind of like, strapping tape or something that surrounds all these water balloons, so that once it gets that big, the water balloons can't get any bigger, but they're all being held in by the sheath, so the water balloons don't pop, but they can't get any more blood into them. They're all full, so they just stay full, and the penis just stays rigid. And there are 3 of those cylinders in a penis, 3 of them, one on top and 2 down below on the sides. And so billions of water balloons are being filled up with blood. And the blood fills up all the water balloons, and the heart pumps the blood into the penis. Why? Because the emotional brain has seen something that its sexiness recognition centers say that's sexy, and the emotional brain has sent nerve impulses down to the penis, opened up the arteries, the heart has pumped blood into the penis, and the penis becomes erect, okay? Now, the Christian attitude toward this is that you shouldn't have been thinking about or looking at whatever it was that got you turned on in the first place. Because the Christian attitude is being sexually aroused is wrong unless you're married. You shouldn't become sexually aroused at all. And if you do become sexually aroused, you should stop thinking about or looking at whatever it is that is turning you on, or doing whatever it is that's turning you on, and not put yourself in a situation of being sexually aroused, because God thinks that's bad enough to send you to hell for. What do we think about God? What we think about God is that the Christian God, the Israelite God, the Indian gods of North American Indians, or Asiatic Indians, the Chinese, Japanese, the ancient Greek and Roman gods, the Middle Eastern gods of ancient times, the God of the Bible, all these different versions of God are all versions of something that I call the absolutely unknowable. The absolutely unknowable. Because there's absolutely no way that we can know anything about non-physical entities. And all these gods are supposed to be spirit beings, made out of spirit, which is a non-physical stuff. And they're supposed to have magic powers, and they're supposed to be able to know what's going on without having any sense organs, and they're supposed to be able to make anything happen just by willing it to happen, all right? And it's a dogma that you must believe in the real existence of whatever invisible imaginary spirit being your particular cultural tradition tells you actually exists. But what we pleasurologists, who happen to be realists, say about that is, in reality, no human being can know anything whatsoever about non-physical beings. There is no way we can gather any information about them. And so there is no reason to believe anything about absolutely unknowable non-physical spirit beings. So to punish a young person or to shame a young person and say you're a bad person for becoming sexually aroused, what you're doing there is you're taking one version of the absolutely unknowable and saying this is the true version, and it's a sex-negative version. It's a version of the absolutely unknowable who doesn't like sexuality. And what I say is, well, why not use an absolutely unknowable version that does like sex? Why not have a sex-positive, imaginary version of the absolutely unknowable? Because that's just as likely, just as reasonable, even more reasonable, I think, that if there were entities that created us, they would want us to enjoy our body and our consciousness as much as possible by creating as euphoric states of happiness and pleasure and satisfaction as we possibly can, and that is what would be most pleasing to the absolutely unknowable. And people who try to make young people feel ashamed of their sexuality so that they cannot create, they end up not being able to create very euphoric states of consciousness with their sexuality because their sexuality has been damaged by years of sex-negative miseducation. The people who are doing that sex-negative miseducation, they're the ones who ought to be spending eternity in hell, if anybody is. They would be the bad ones, because they are needlessly destroying human happiness instead of promoting human happiness. We pleasurologists want to destroy all of the irrational ideas about sexuality that impair people from having a fully sex-positive, natural sexual arousal process that includes as much bliss as possible in consciousness and the most powerful orgasms possible in consciousness. And we can only have that if we don't have any irrational sexual guilt. If we say all we're doing is learning to satisfy our own sex drive, we may do it alone, we may do it with a partner. We're learning how to do it intelligently and safely so that we don't have any unintended consequences, unpleasant consequences. We're creating only positive, happy consequences by choosing our partners very carefully, by being sure that we're sexually healthy, by being sure that we're using contraception, and by being sure that everyone who participates wants to participate voluntarily and is really desirous of participating, is not just going along with it, but is actually positively desiring sharing this same sexual experience, whatever it may be. And it doesn't have to be physical contact of any sort even. I used to have tremendously erotic experiences at the nude beach all through my mid to late 30s and into my mid 40s. For a decade there, I was having highly erotic sexual experiences with women at the nude beach who were completely voluntary participants who were showing their body to me, or who were looking at my body, or who were doing both at the same time. And there was this erotic exchange between us that was highly arousing, that then my own brain could use to fantasize about when I was masturbating back at home, and I could have super euphoric sex with full consciousness sexual bliss for as long as I wanted, remembering those fantastic times there at the nude beach. And, you know, you could already tell from the sexual development stories that I've told you about myself that exhibitionism is one of my favorite things, and voyeurism, looking at a woman's body, is also one of my favorite things. And that's why the nude beach turned out to be the perfect erotic situation for me at a certain period in my life. And the reason for that will become clear as I continue with my sexual history, which I will do now. So I found this copy of Life magazine with Gina Lollobrigida as the Queen of Sheba, both on the cover and in the layout inside, you know, with Gina in the bathtub, Gina wearing this transparent gauzy dress, Gina in her fancy belly dancing fertility cult costume with the bra that looked like there was only fingers clutching her breast. Now, it turned out my emotional brain, when I looked at these pictures at 10 years old, didn't know that her bra cups actually had flesh-colored cloth sewn into them, so that actually you weren't seeing any part of her breast. It just looked like you were seeing her breasts and everything but the nipple, you know. And then when she was standing wearing that gauzy dress, I couldn't see her nipples in that picture. I didn't understand why. I could see her flesh all there, her naked flesh there. But she was just wearing a flesh-colored body costume, a bodysuit, flesh-colored bodysuit within that gauzy dress and the little belt that just barely covered her pubic area. But I didn't know that. My emotional brain didn't know that. My emotional brain thought she was really naked inside that transparent try-on long white dress, absolutely fabulous. She's a beautiful brunette, and looked fantastic in that. So my emotional brain, my 10-year-old emotional brain, believing that she was in fact naked inside that dress, recognized that as a very sexy situation. Female nakedness is very sexy to my emotional brain. And so it would give me an erection when I thought about Gina standing there in that dress. And that's probably what I was thinking about when my mom pulled my pants down at lunch that day. So what matters is what our emotional brain thinks. My emotional brain thought that her bra really was nothing but the wire circles that kind of went around and covered her nipples, but showed the rest of her breast, it looked like. But, that wasn't the case, but my emotional brain thought that it was the case. My emotional brain didn't know about the flesh-colored cloth there. So my emotional brain saw Gina as being actually topless there, basically. And it was the first, photograph of a topless woman that I'd ever seen, even though her nipples weren't visible, but it looked like the rest of her breasts were. And for 1959, you see, that was so far back before the sexual revolution. The sexual revolution was just about to come along, and this Life magazine issue was a contributor to it. And it contributed not just to my personal sexual development, but it had some other repercussions that were kind of interesting, kind of fun, because I showed this magazine to my 3 close friends. We had a kind of a little club. There were 3 of us who were the same age. That was myself and Martha and Lois. And then Martha's younger brother, Timmy, was a few years younger. I thought this was such a cool photo layout and so sexy. I mean, I didn't know the word sexy, but I just knew that it made me feel really good looking at these pictures. So I thought I would share them with my close friends here. We had a little kind of a club. We would meet up in Martha's backyard. In the corner of the backyard, there were 2 walls that came together. But then there was some kind of a tree or a platform or something. I think it was a tree, and we could get up there, and we had a little kind of treehouse clubhouse thing where just the 4 of us kids would get up there, And so we were very close. Martha and Lois and I were in the same class, at school. So I showed them the magazine article, and then they left. They didn't say much about it. I didn't think anything about it, but it had 2 repercussions. First, my parents got a call from Lois's parents. Lois had told them about these pictures that I'd showed them. And I don't know whether she was scandalized by them or what her reaction was. I didn't ever hear from Lois personally what her reaction was, but her parents were upset about it, and they called my parents and said, not to let me ever do that again. And so that was like a shaming thing. It was a sexual shaming thing. It could have come down on me, as my parents could have turned to me and said, "Oh, Steve, you were a bad boy to show those sexy pictures to Lois and Martha and Timmy. You shouldn't have done that." It could have been a sexually shaming situation, and that's what Lois's parents wanted it to be. Their immediate reaction to any kind of sexuality was, shame on you, shame, 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 shame on Stevie for doing that. But my parents, fortunately, just laughed about it. They hung up, they said, "Oh yeah, we'll make sure to tell Stevie." And they hung up and they just laughed about it. They thought it was hilarious. So that's good. Of course, it was my father who actually, it was his magazine, and I think he was probably jacking off to it. Because as I've mentioned, he and my mom didn't have sex. So, I don't know, I'm sure, previous to that, his best jacking off material were the covers of Perry Mason mysteries, paperback mysteries. Like one of them showed Perry's sexy secretary, Della Street, sliding down a muddy hillside. And as she slid down the hillside, pulled her skirt up and showed her legs and her garter belt, her stockings, and her high heels. And so it was a kind of a striptease on the cover of a Perry Mason murder mystery. And that was one of the things that my father could purchase. As a minister, he couldn't go purchase Playboy or anything like that. But he could purchase Perry Mason mysteries, and he had a subscription to Life magazine. So, and Life magazine was the most popular magazine in the country at that time. So for Life magazine to have these pictures, sort of made it okay for my dad to have this jacking off material. And so anyway, fortunately, they didn't make a big deal about it, and they didn't make me feel ashamed of having been looking at the pictures or showing them to Martha and Lois and Timmy. But the other effect that it had was sort of different, and it was a more serious effect, because what happened was, apparently, Timmy did get, turned on. Apparently, looking at these pictures, I was not the only one whose emotional brain recognized these pictures of Gina Lollobrigida as being sexy. And I mean, you can look them up on the internet. Gina Lollobrigida in the movie Solomon and Sheba. You can look them up for yourself. And nowadays they are so tame, it's ridiculous. But in those days, it was pretty sexy. So Timmy, apparently, got the idea that was pretty nice to look at Gina in the magazine almost naked. And he would enjoy looking at other naked women. And so the next thing I heard was that our little clubhouse, and where the walls came together and there was a tree and we could sit there and have our little club meetings, was closed. It was off limits now. Why? Well, it turned out that over the other side of the wall was the woman who lived next door to our house. Our house was here, Martha's house was here, and Timmy's house was here. And then the neighbor lady on the other side of the wall there, we could not see into her yard at all from our yard because there was a big brick wall. It was complete privacy. So she was over there. She was a middle-aged woman. I don't know exactly how old, but she wasn't a real young woman. And she was apparently living there by herself. She must have had some connection with the movie business in some way, because a lot of people around where we lived had a connection with the movie business, and that way she was maybe a divorced wife of some movie executive. She had her own swimming pool, and she liked to lie out on a lounge chair beside the swimming pool, naked in the sun. And she'd probably been doing that for years, because, it was private all around her yard. But now Timmy had gotten the idea that it's fun to look at naked women. So he was sitting up in our clubhouse. None of the rest of us knew about it. He was sitting up in the clubhouse, peeking over the clubhouse, enjoying looking at the neighbor lady lying out in the sun. And at some point she noticed him. And so she calls Martha and Timmy's parents and tells them all about it. And so after that, none of us are allowed to get up in the clubhouse, because that's where you could look over and see the neighbor lady lying out naked in the sun. She could have taken a different attitude. She could have taken the attitude, well, young man, if you want to look, go right ahead. Not going to bother me, That would have been a slightly different attitude. But in the 1950s, I mean, she was being daring just to sunbathe in the nude in her own backyard where nobody could see her, But so she couldn't she couldn't tolerate the idea that somebody was actually going to be looking at her while she was doing it. She had too much sexual shame herself for that anyway. And of course, I don't think people should spy on other people. I am not in favor of looking at naked women or anybody at all of either gender if they don't know you're looking at them and they aren't sort of giving you permission to. It's sort of a violation of privacy. And so that's why going to the nude beach was completely different, because everybody who went to the nude beach expected to be looked at while they were out there naked. Nobody expected to go out there, get naked, and not have anybody else around them look at them. So all of the exhibitionism and voyeurism that was going on out at the nude beach was voluntary and spontaneous and mutual participation. But that's kind of getting ahead of my story. Anyway, so that was Gina Lollobrigida, chapter 1. There's a chapter 2. I had a friend, David. His father was my father's preaching partner. The two of them were both ministers, and they would go off on preaching missions together, and they brought the families with them when we went to Australia and New Zealand. So David and I got to be good friends because we hung out a lot during the year and a half that we were in Australia and New Zealand, and we came back to Los Angeles where we lived, and I would go over to David's house sometimes, and one time I went over there and he got out his father's Encyclopedia Britannica, which had some photographs of statues of naked women or near naked women, including Napoleon Bonaparte's sister. And I thought that was really sexy, that Napoleon Bonaparte's sister would have posed nude for a sculptor. I thought that was really hot. But about that same time, David came up to where we were living. We'd moved out of Los Angeles, out to the coast on a more tranquil area. And so David came up to visit us. And lo and behold, we went to the movie theater, and what was showing at the movies, our parents dropped us off to see what movie. What do you suppose it was? No, it wasn't Solomon and Sheba. It was Neville Shute's On the Beach. On the Beach was a movie about everybody slowly dying off after a nuclear holocaust. America has been totally obliterated, but people in Australia are now going to be dying off because of radiation and stuff. And our parents thought that was a perfectly okay movie for us to go to see when we were 11 years old. David was 12, I was 11. But, the coming attractions for the movie were Solomon and Sheba. So we got to see the best parts of Solomon and Sheba. It was like the Life magazine article brought to life. And then we got to see the same scenes that they'd shown, in the Life magazine article, Gina in the bath, stretching up one naked leg and stroking it. And you could almost see her breasts in the water, and she's naked in the water. And Gina at the fertility dance in her belly dancing costume. And that's when David noticed that the costume, had flesh-colored stuff on the bra. I don't think he had seen the Life magazine article. His dad was a more conservative guy than mine. He was much more straight-laced than my minister father. David's father was really uptight, so he wouldn't have had Life magazine with Gina Lollobrigida all over the cover in his house, not at all. He had the Encyclopedia Britannica, because that was, a sign of prestige. And he couldn't help it that there were pictures of naked sculptures in the Encyclopedia Britannica, but they were kind of few and far between, and you had to really kind of look for them to find them, which David apparently was motivated enough to do. So anyway, David and I watched the coming attraction to Solomon and Sheba. Wow, that's great. And then we sit through this movie that gets more and more and more depressing until at the end, the last two people who are left commit suicide or something. And it's just horrible movie. But then, our parents aren't coming back to pick us up yet. So after the intermission, we go back in because they're going to show Solomon and Sheba coming attractions again. So we got back in after the intermission and watched Solomon and Sheba coming attractions again, and that was great. And then we went outside because we didn't want to see that stupid movie again, that horribly depressing movie. So we went outside. There was a real nice area to sort of sit around and talk and play. There was a little fountain there. It was a real nice area. And so our parents still didn't come back and get us. So we waited till the next intermission, and after the next intermission, we went back and saw the coming attractions a third time, and then came on out. And eventually our parents came and got us. But it was after that after the third time, as we were waiting around, that David said, "Oh, you didn't notice that there was cloth on her brassiere?" "No, I didn't." So that was a little bit disillusioning. But the main thing also that I really honed in on was her naked tummy, because in those days, two-piece bathing suits were straight across the waist. There was, even bikinis were just a little bit further down, but not much. Bikinis hadn't really come in yet. In 1959, they weren't popular. A few, maybe movie stars wore them on the French Riviera. But, in California, even a two-piece bathing suit, with just a straight across waist was, about as sexy as it got. And in Gina's fertility dance costume, the middle of the costume dove down toward her pubic mound, and then there was kind of a circular thing covering her pubic mound and then some stuff. But it was like diving down and pointing right to her pubic mound there. So it was a really sexy thing, and her whole naked stomach there and her belly button and everything. And then up above that, this bra that wasn't really, it didn't look like a real bra, but just two hands grabbing her breast. So she looked like she was completely naked above the waist, and then, down right almost to her pubic area. So my emotional brain remembered that afterwards, and did not forget that image and enjoyed thinking about it. And this was late in the summer of 1960. I was 11 3/4, and David went back to Los Angeles with his parents. But we were having hot nights that summer, long hot nights, summer nights, and it was like almost too hot to wear even pajamas. And my brother would go to sleep, and I started kicking off the covers and kicking off my pajamas, and I wanted to just lie there naked in the warm night, and just to lie there naked without any clothing on was so much fun for my emotional brain that I got a hard on just lying there naked in the dark. Didn't know what to do with it. Didn't even have a clue that there was anything to do with it. I didn't know there was orgasm was in the future. I had no orgasms in my future as far as I knew. I didn't know what an orgasm was. I didn't know what sex was. I didn't know how, well, I did know how babies were made. Angels put the baby in the mommy's tummy, and then she gives birth to the baby. So I knew that. I wasn't worried about how babies were made. But I didn't know what sex was. I had no idea what to do with an erection, what the purpose of it was. So I'm just lying there completely naked. But as I'm lying there naked, I'm also having, images of scantily clad women going through my mind. And I just can't, my emotional brain, my sex drive level, my sexual drive level has risen to the point where for my emotional brain, taking care of my sex drive, satisfying my sex drive, had become the number one priority. And it was trying to get me to do that. But the only way it could do that was by putting pictures of sexy women in my mind. Maybe swimsuit models bikini models from the back of Skin Diver magazine. They weren't anything like the bikinis that we have today, but they were nevertheless, bikinis, smaller than the two-piece suits that I was seeing for real on the beach. And pictures of women in wetsuits, form-fitting wetsuits. That was sexy to my, 11 and 3/4-year-old brain. You see, when you're sexually deprived, then whatever you can get, whatever opportunities your emotional brain can find for sexual stimulation is what your emotional brain will gravitate toward. Now, if I'd been in a Muslim country where the women all had to wear jabalas and be covered from head to toe, then I wouldn't have even had I wouldn't have had any images of real life women to think about. Anyway, I don't want to get off the track here. So I'm lying there, a hot summer night, and then I'm lying there naked, and I have a sheet over me, just nothing but a sheet because it's so warm. And I've taken off my pajamas, and I'm lying there naked under the sheet, and I'm lying on my back with a heart on, thinking about naked women. And certainly Gina Lollobrigida was one of the women that I was thinking about. And then, as I'm lying there and breathing in and out, just the motion of my breath, was just slightly rubbing the front of my penis as it's up, backward like that, the sensitive front of my penis against the sheet, and then all of a sudden, shazam, 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 shazam. And it was like this lightning bolt of pleasure shooting up through the center of my consciousness, dividing my consciousness right in half. It's like splitting my consciousness in half. And repeated lightning bolts, or, coming up like the spout of a tornado or something, but shooting up and filling my brain with a pleasure like I had never known before, a totally new kind of pleasure. I mean, it was along the lines of the sexual arousal pleasure, but it was so much more intense and so much more pleasurable and so amazing that I have this experience, and then I'm lying there and I'm just sort of relaxing and trying to say, what in the world was that about? I guess I could have gone to my mommy and asked her, Mommy, what the heck was that about? But that didn't occur to me. I figured I'd invented something absolutely new. I just had to figure out how to make it happen again. And so the next night, as I'm lying on my back under the sheet, I start deliberately, moving my hips a little bit so that the front of my penis will rub against the sheet that's lying on top of it. And then shazam, it happened again. And so I knew this was a repeatable experience. And according to learning theory, anytime we do something that results in pleasure, something that's really rewarding, then our emotional brain will give us the urge to do that again. Anything that was rewarding, the reward reinforces our desire to do that activity again. If an orgasm had been painful instead, then it would have taught me not to do that again, to avoid that. But of course, an orgasm is pleasurable because an orgasm, during evolutionary history, an orgasm has always been the way that men inject their sperm into a woman's vagina in order to have reproduction occur to fertilize an egg. And orgasm for women has always been the culmination of a sexual act, which rewards them for allowing the man to deposit his sperm inside their vagina, which makes reproduction possible. And reproduction was one of the most important things that natural selection wanted to make sure was carried out by every generation. It wasn't, that's the wrong way to put it. Natural selection is a non-intelligent, that's a blind kind of thing that happens. But it's just a prerequisite. Reproduction is a prerequisite for the genes getting passed on from generation to generation and the species surviving. So natural selection has gradually formed our emotional brain so that orgasms are intensely rewarding because orgasms are associated with reproduction. And our emotional brain has been designed by genetics and by natural selection to want to make sure that we reproduce. So our emotional brain is ready to respond to sexual arousal stimuli, and when we have an orgasm, our emotional brain says, that was the most fun I've ever had. Let's do that again. Whatever that was that caused the orgasm, let's have it happen again. And that is the natural way that our emotional brain learns to enjoy sexual arousal and sexual satisfaction and to want to pursue that throughout the rest of our life. So anyway, I'll talk about this more next time, and we'll see what happens now that I've learned how to have an orgasm.